Observation 1's resolution analysis. They support the top of the United Nations Security Council should refer North Korea to the International Criminal Court for human rights violations. The be supported the framework, one fiasco, an act of imagination. Necessary that both teams access to debate any of the framework to national prosecution should reject to the affirmative team has the right to define the resolution reasonably through use of frame measures with the burden of proving the topic true. 3. Policy and methods. The best criteria for the delays allows both teams access to predictable ordinance and methods of refutation. 4. Discursive implications to be evaluated through the framework of the affirmative if the methodology and plans plot the implication of the criticism must be a direct effect of plain passage. 5. Due to the fact that words have multiplicity of meaning unless the affirmative interpretation is shown to exclude the negative not to be accepted or removed with science in the PMC. 6. The PMC science through committing interpretations or framework shows that discursive implications are more immediate and must be paramount over the PMC to show errors. Observation 2 is the plain text. The United Nations Security Council will refer North Korea to the International Criminal Court for human rights violations. It's the resolution. Observation 3 is installment. The first argument is that the ICC is going to decide who to prosecute within the country after they complete their own research. The little A's, you can look to them doing this in Sudan, and the little B's, you can look to this doing this in Libya, that whenever they do trials, they do their own research to decide who it is exactly that is going to be tried within the country after a country has referred a nation to them. The little C is that this is typical. They typically select government officials who authorize and order the atrocities that are being committed, means that they are going to isolate the best individuals to prosecute. And the little D's, you can also look to them having done this in Yugoslavia, where they tried 161 individuals after completing their own research. Advantage 1, awareness. They support these DNAs. The first argument is that there's very little well-distributed information about life inside of North Korea right now. The little is A is you can look to escaped North Koreans who live in places like Seoul and other places around the world now and have narratives of the violence that they faced while in North Korea, but this is not well-distributed because there has been no international forum about it. The little B is that the ICC is a unique hub of international attention. You can look to the trials of many African warlords that shed light on the human rights violations that occurred in those nations and was able to effectively disseminate information about the atrocities in those countries. The second argument is that the world rhetoric is that of vilifying North Korea and using language of violence to demonize these individuals right now. The little A is that this is a form of exclusion of the other by recognizing them as necessarily evil. The little B is that we frequently hear arguments and quotations like there are 1.1 million active duty military and 8.2 million reserve military. This is the largest army in the world, and we consistently use this to say that the entire nation of North Korea is poised to attack South Korea at any given moment. The visa point is blank. The first argument is that we bring this to an international forum for trial and expose the narratives of these individuals to better be able to understand what it is to live inside North Korea and not be part of the government, to be part of the individuals that are excluded by the majority there. The second argument is that this is a critical reimagining of life inside of North Korea. The little A is that creates a new space for understanding and appreciation of the North Korean other by bringing the citizens who are forced into the military by the government to a space where they are able to share their narratives. The little B is that we allow the embracement of the other and a rejection of the current Western view of the North Korean citizens by seeing the citizens' perspective on life there. Only through this are we ever going to be able to understand the plight of those individuals. The C support of the impacts. The first argument is that this is key to being able to resolve future conflict because the evaluation of human life of the North Koreans will be prioritized when we have a diversified understanding of the class structures within North Korea. It means that we are going to be able to privilege the lives of the individuals who are being discriminated against by the North Korean government above the North Korean government, and that without understanding that delineation, we are never going to be able to identify the difference between those two. The second argument is that this is key to value of life, to not just typify and stereotype these individuals. Only through recognition of their place-specific problems can we truly have recognizance of their individual value. The third argument is that this is the root cause of all violence against North Korea right now. Attacks against North Korea are going to be more targeted and lead to attacks against the government when we're able to embrace the other in the event of conflict. We will mobilize groups to save North Koreans in the event of future conflict, and we will resolve some of these deaths, which is key because these deaths are irreversible and the fundamental biological drive to life that we experience. Yes, Corey?
Otherization leads to disposable population.
Right, moreover, the fourth argument is that otherization leads to disposable population, that if we continue to just construct the North Korean as the demonized other of typified military violence, then we are never going to be able to embrace them and recognize their place in society, and this will always lead to their death in any event of conflict. Advantage 2, UN legitimacy. Based upon its uniqueness, the first argument is that the UN legitimacy is low now. You can look to the little a of Crimea. The United Nations was prevented from action in Crimea by a Russian veto, creating a perception of UN ineffectiveness in international affairs. The little b is that inaction in Syria. The UN has been unable to take any action on the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Syria, causing countries like the United States and others to take independent action to resolve human rights violations. The second argument is that the United Nations Declaration on the rights of the child is coming out. The little a is the declaration is being drafted by the countries in the United Nations right now. The little b is that it faces opposition, specifically the Catholic Church is opposing ratification of this proposal, and the little c is that the protection of this leads to the protection of human trafficking, specifically on children, that it's an instance in which we change the prevalence of sexual violence if this is to be ratified and acknowledged by the international community. Thus, the b support of the links. The first argument is that the United Nations takes actions against North Korea without the need or support from other nations. The little a is that they do not need to rely on other countries' hegemony to be able to be effective in this scenario. The little b is that this legitimizes the process of review that exists within the United Nations, because when they're seen as an independent actor that is effective, then they are uniquely able to solve for human rights violations in other locations. The second argument is that this causes a pivot to the United Nations and the international community for addressing human rights violations. The little a is that there's no good actor right now, and that this will establish the United Nations as an effective watchdog on human rights, and that this is key to be able to check back against human rights violations in the future. The third argument is that we strengthen the United Nations action by the United Nations Security Council, which is the strongest portion of the United Nations, affirming the role of the United Nations in human rights. The C support of the impacts. The first argument is that we are going to be able to protect the rights of children as a result of the Declaration on the Rights of the Child. The little a is that this is going to be affirmed through the United Nations Security Council, means that it is able to act on its own, but it also has the support of the United Nations Security Council on human rights violations. The little b is that we are going to be able to prevent sexual trafficking and abuse of these children, which is key because these individuals are being forced into a systemic structural violence right now, where these individuals are being trafficked with no check from the international community, thus devaluing their existence. The second argument is that this is only going to be effective with the United Nations Security Council support, which is uniquely provided through the plan. The third argument is that this is key to begin to resolve the structural violence these individuals are experiencing right now. The little a is that there is a need for international support because they are almost always trafficked between countries, means that only an international focus can solve. And the little b is that even if we can't solve, there's a change in the international perception of infection against these, which provides for future changes.
Alright, so the order is going to be 2 off, and then
All right.
everybody ready? Alright. First off, this is China. Said the uniqueness of one, this is that China rejected an international human rights report on North Korea, which recommended the ICC referral. They said the findings from the ICC are wrong, and they rejected this as a method, as a policy. The links are the plan forces China to reverse this pronouncement because they have to not veto it because they're one of the permanent members on the Human Rights Security Council. Means that China has to not veto it, which is going to cause them to flip flop from his current stance on referrals to the ICC. The internal links power for China, the Chinese Communist Party is a zero sum. They view an external threat. Because of this external threat, they're going to need. They view this as a decrease in credibility by external threats, which means it's going to cause them to react aggressively and autocratically to increase support for the Chinese Communist Party, which is going to they're going to try and distract and shift the focus away from this external threat. The second internal link is that hardliners in the party are going to be like, you got ours, so we want you got yours, so we want ours, which is going to cause them to take a harder stance on the situation in the Diaoyu and Kaku Islands, go to the impact war, which is Japan, which is the first off, this is going to lead to, because Japan has such a strong interest in the Diaoyu and Kaku Islands, when China takes a hard stance on them, Japan is going to have to respond, which means that first off is going to lead to proliferation because it's going to lead to rapid Japanese proliferation because they're going to feel surrounded by China's intervention in the Diaoyu and Kaku Islands. This can happen in 6 months, and rapid proliferation is super bad because it's destabilizing. It also encourages first strikes because people don't know what the other person has, but also it drastically increases possibility for miscalculation because they are always on the defensive. You can look to the example of the Cold War where Russia almost launched nukes because a flock of birds flew over their country. This is massively harmful in a world where the United States and other allies are going to be dragged into the conflict. But even if that doesn't happen, Japan and China will cause miscalculation, could cause a nuclear strike, which could pick up enough dust into the atmosphere to end all photosynthetic life and cause extinction. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so your argument is that China is going to take a hardline stance against the cockroach and will proliferate nuclear weapons?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Next off is North Korea. Just has the uniqueness. The first off is in the status quo. North Korea is worried about international community intervention. The A point under this is that Shinzo Abe and the South Korean Prime Minister are meeting next week to discuss bilateral policy issues. So this is causing NorthRea to be on hyper alert. The argument under this is that North Korea hasn't been referred to the ICC in the status quo because the ICC's focus has been on Crimea and Venezuela, which means the plan shifts focus at least perceptually to North Korea, which means it's going to cause an ongoing investigation. Which leads to an ongoing focus on North Korea. Basically, they're saying links, I guess, on their advantage. But it's going to cause an ongoing international focus on North Korea. The internal links, North Korea, leadership views the political power and internal and external balance as a zero sum, basically the same internal link argument on the other one. But they're going to have to respond to the external threat. They're going to do this through a crackdown on the population. They're going to do this on an internal crackdown on the population, which is a little different than the other links. But the argument under this is they're going to have to, this happened when they increased executions when Japan and the U.S. were cooperating on the nuclear crackdown on North Korea, which is the warrant for this. The first impact is dissonant crackdown. This kills hundreds of thousands by targeted killing, war camps, or food restrictions because of North Korea's perceptual threat of dissonance. This leads to brutal autocratic control. This automatically turns their case, their advantage one, where they're talking about awareness and they're talking about increasing the value of life in North Korea. This automatically turns case because it's actually decreasing the value of life when they have to crack down internally because of the external threat. The second impact is war. North Korea strikes South Korea to catch them off guard because they know this bigger international focus coming. And the impact on this is that Seoul is 50 miles from the DMZ, and there's has been found that there's tunnels under the DMZ which renders the landmines ineffective. That means that North Korea can invade Seoul within a day. This means that U.S. and other countries are going to have to respond, and they're going to have to use nukes to do this because this is the only way to counteract North Korea because they can get to Seoul so fast. And in a world where this conflict goes nuclear, again, same impact situation on the first DA. Okay, go to advantage one. Go to the link where they say that it's going to, this is going to bring the North Korea to an international forum. Due to their own solvency, it's only going to actually crack down on the officials. It's not going to actually interview individuals. This was the situation in Sudan and Libya, where they only brought international attention to the leaders of the nations, not to the individual living condition of the people within the nation. But also, you can look to the fact that even if this does happen, North Korea is going to create a fabricated livelihood like they do whenever the U.S. tries to take a look at their country. Like when we send representatives over to their country, or even just tourists over to their country, they fabricate this livelihood when they put happy people on the streets and pay people to look happy, and they fabricate a happy lifestyle, which means we're never going to gain an accurate view into the lives of these people, which means that it's never actually going to change. Also go down to their impacts. They say key to value to life. There's always going to be value to life, which means that you should always prefer an extinction level impact, which the negative gives you, because even in concentration camps, people laughed, people cried, people told stories. There's always going to be value to life no matter the amount of atrocities committed against people. Also, they say that it's the root cause of all violence, but what we can see, they say that misperception is the root cause of all violence. What we can see is that North Korea initiates a lot of conflict. They just bombed South Korea a few months ago. They're the initiators of the conflict, which means that it's not going to change unless the leadership changes in the country, and their plan cannot solve for this because North Korea honestly doesn't give a shit like what the ICC says. North Korea won't care because if they can build $300 million ski complex for Kim Jong-un, while millions of people starve. The plan is a joke. The ICC cannot cause them to do anything. But again, the DA can still stand because the perceptual shift that the international focus is being focused on North Korea will cause an internal crackdown. Yeah.
There's the ICC to stop
Right. No solvency on this too, because the ICC ultimately does not have the capability to do this, because there's been a lot of other countries that try to stop North Korea from committing these atrocities. None of those have actually worked. In a world where the ICC has had no teeth really in conflicts throughout history, it means that they will have no teeth in this situation. They cannot force North Korea into actually doing anything. But go to the UN legitimacy. They say go to the links where they say that the UN has to be the only actor, but this is not true because the US can be an actor in this situation. The US has actually intervened in a lot of places promoting human rights throughout the world, and they've done this with through multilateral initiatives, such as when they worked with France to intervene in Iraq. The US is perfectly capable of doing this, and the UN does not need to gain credibility to do this, but also there's several reasons why ICC's credit is bad for US operations. The first argument under this is that the Yugoslavia said that NATO's attack on Kosovo was illegal, regardless of whether it's NATO or the US. Is still a constraint on US intervention, which is bad for human rights abroad. That turns case, but also the second argument under this is that other states included the use of uranium-tipped weapons, even though these weapons are the standard way to penetrate armor like tanks and APCs. This is again a constraint on US intervention, which only harms human rights efforts throughout the world, because the US is one of the major promoters of human rights. Around the world. The third argument under this is that the ICC has been used to criticize the U.S. for overreacting in Iraq. The argument under this is that it forces the U.S. to be more complex due to backlash from the ICC. If the ICC gains credit, the U.S. is going to have to ignore these conflicts, which only hurts human rights. That again turns case. The B argument under this is that U.S. head is good because it prevents, and U.S. head is ultimately good, which means that UN legitimacy harms U.S. head because U.S. head prevents multipolarity, and multipolarity creates a lot of violence. So,
Here is going to be the case. We go to branch 1, branch 2, China, North Korea.
Everybody ready? I just need one second. Yes.
Everybody good?
None of your solvency arguments about why the ICC is ineffective don't matter in a world where both of our benches are coming off the process of both grieving and library narratives to change our understanding of the international community and why it increases in the United States legitimacy. We don't need to wait until we actually have a national ruling that has any kind of teeth. Our argument is that we can increase both the legitimacy of the United Nations and increase our awareness and change our perception of the North Korean people overall through the plan sex. No, none of your arguments actually affect this. But look at the line of love. Your first argument here is that we only crack down on the officials. This first said that this argument isn't true. Our argument here is that the ICC goes into countries like North Korea to do research and gather narratives on why the officials have cracked down. Even if the officials are the only ones that actually are the ones that actually try, it doesn't matter, because the fact that the narratives still come out and we actually increase the awareness in the international community means we still get actual solvency. Your next argument here is that North Korea will lie and fabricate the issue. Versus if the ICC has extensive research on these issues. We said countries like Sudan and Libya have both tried to fabricate these issues and still did that. It means the arguments aren't tradition. Second said the ICC does research for a full year. It means there's no reason. It means that North Korea can't keep up with the facade for that long. It means there's no truth to this argument. Third said escapees back this argument. The people that have gone out of North Korea and are articulating narratives that have come out means that we just be informed to spread those narratives. Means that your argument here is in true. Additionally, your next argument is that we always have valuable life. This is not the argument. Our argument here is that the rhetoric of the international community is coming out is preventing the access of individuals. It's instructing the North Korea, not only the government, but the people as one a militarist and violent. It means that only the plan allows for any construction of our understanding based on the actual what's actually happening. The individuals are being excluded and violently hurt the status quo. Means the only plan creates this new forum.
There are arguments on the North Korea does that probably prove this.
Yeah, there are arguments on the North Koreans that probably prove this, that they created a construction of North Korea as a violent and irrational activities that are the entirety of the range of one functions as a rhetorical criticism of your disadvantage, probably an independent reasons why you should reject the negative. Next argument to make here is that the ICC is not going to care. North Korea is not going to care what the ICC says. First, say this probably pushes there's no link to your disadvantage. That North Korea is not going to care what the ICC does means that they're probably not going to backlash issues. Second, say that that's not our argument. We don't need the ICC to be able to do anything. We just need to create a forum which we can change the international understanding of North Korea. Means we still need access to solvency. The last argument here is that the ICC can't solve for the atrocities. We still need the same access by changing our understanding, creating a different international forum that changes how the international community functions in relation to the other. Is the best interpretation to be able to break down these forms of oppression. If the ICC doesn't directly solve the plan, it's still be able to solve it. extend all the impacts here, but completely consider this the root of all violence, that it's targeted and of the others, but leads to the mobilization and destruction of these individuals, and that creates explosive population. Both of these evaluate the entirety of the case. Addition said you should evaluate probable and systemic impacts over the flashpoint impacts. So argument here is that probability is that focus on probability is key because they focus on large scale impacts prevents any form of action. It creates political paralysis. We never be able to act. Additionally, you should be preferring the systemic impact, because time frame is an indicator of probability, and that the assuming something happens is probably the more likely something is happening. Focus on something way down the road is never going to be able to occur. You should always prefer probability. Additionally, the focus on magnitude impact makes it something you would never be able to act. Means you should always be preferring these highly probable systemic impacts. United Nations legitimacy. The first argument is that the United States can act too. They say the United States intervenes. This is not the argument. The argument is United Nations legitimacy. The United Nations has to play an independent actor that's able to accomplish things on its own, nor be able to allow for the rights and for the Declaration of the Rights of the Child to be actually ratified by international countries. Our argument here is that it's the United Nations legitimacy that is key to the ratification of these kinds of conventions and agreements that show international law. This means that all of your argumentation about why the U.S. can act don't function in this world. Additionally, the next argument is that the United Nations intervention is bad. First, it's just straight up nothing to this argument as a referring to the North Korea to the ICC, which is a criminal court. It means that there's no risk of United Nations intervention in North Korea. It means that you don't get access to this argument. Additionally, second, say the ICC is legal. It means that this functions within the state frameworks. It means there's no reason why you get access to this argument. It means that all of your arguments about why the United Nations is bad don't function in this world. Additionally, the last argument make here is that the United States is going to ignore conflicts. First, we say the United States is probably ignoring conflicts now in Crimea and Syria because they haven't intervened. This is probably a reason why the argument is in true. Additionally, second, say that there's probably a better framework for to be able to check back against dictatorships that actually sending to the ICC as opposed to just going and destroying them probably is a better internal warrant to resolving the issues.
Also, this entire advantage is about how we don't need other countries' hedge. So even if the U.S. doesn't act,
additionally, we don't need it. Its entire advantage is about how we don't need the United States hedge, and probably acting through international actors is probably better overall. Means we resolve internally into this term. Good. China.
You just straight flip out this just that, and you don't provide very many warrants. First, we say that you can cross-apply the framework, the probability framework. Giga period means you should be wrongly rejecting these kinds of flat-point impacts. Means the independent reason to reject the team. Addition, second, said this is not unique. They are backlashing now. The United Nations just released the report that on North Korea backlash on the North Korean human rights and violations that show, and China just slammed it and made China very angry. Means probably angry in status quo, and it's probably causing the Communist Party to increase. Means it's probably not unique in status quo. Addition, second, say turn that this causes China to move away from North Korea. Our argument here is that when North Korea becomes such a focus of the international community, probably is a reason why China is going to defer to other allies and try to expand its regional hegemony through different methods instead of the integrated focus on North Korea. Means the case probably resolves its internal link. Addition, second, say there's no internal link to this scenario. The Communist Party doesn't like North Korea in status quo. To say that it is the ruling party that is trying to maintain focus on North Korea, and the Communist Party probably move away from them in order to retain domestic hegemony. Additionally, the fifth argument is the no internal link that China is just saber rattling over the Senkaku Islands. Our argument here is that they're just sending in planes and stuff in order to be able to take the hardline stance in the status quo. There's no risk of an escalation over this scenario. Additionally, the sixth argument here is that there's no risk of Japanese proliferation. The little a here is that it's against their constitution, that is within the constitution that they cannot develop nuclear weapons base that is legally impossible for them to. Additionally, the little b is that the United States will check that the United States has strong anti-proliferation mechanisms that will prevent any risk of Japanese proliferation. In addition, since the United States and Japan are such strong allies, the United States military presence is probably going to be able to check back against any risk of proliferation, even there's no risk of this impact from happening. Additionally, there's no internal link between why China taking a hardline stance. It means that Japan will get nuclear weapons. Say that their domestic military is probably going to be able to check. Good. On North Korea. First, we said first not unique that the focus shift is happening in the status quo. You can lose the human rights report that was just released is causing major backlash from North Korea. Means that North Korea is probably going to start cracking down the status quo. Addition, second, no link. We said there's no that the perception links aren't true. Aren't true because the fact that they probably would have already been triggered. Means there's no internal link to the scenario. Addition, third, more case turns about why North Korea isn't going to care about the ICC. Probably the reasons why you're just said it doesn't matter. Addition, the fourth argument here is the turn that we could probably break down North Korea's overall strength of these issues, and by showing them in the international community allows for part of the ICC and other organizations to be able to check back the theocratic nature of the North Korean. Now, means it's probably checked back your scenario overall.
their internal link scenario is a trade-off, but at the point at which they don't explain why support for the North Korean government trades off with international criticism of North Korea, that doesn't make sense. They're two entirely different
Your
stories.
trade-off arguments don't function in a world where the northern way there can be criticism of the government and support of and strength of the government overall means there's no internal link to the scenario. Your impact here is also not completely non-unique. You say it's going to lead to a crackdown that kills 100,000 people. This is happening in the status quo. Only the plan is able to resolve for the internal wars that is happening in the status quo. It should be said there's no risk of war with South Korea. The mutual defense treaties means the United States would check that against the risk of a Vietnam attack and the fact that the U.S. has made the weapons made to an attack.
Alright, so the order for this is going to be the China NPDA on top, and then it's going to be North Korea NPDA, the awareness advantage, and then the UN ban on the bottom. So, yeah. Alright. First off, on the China NPDA, look to the linker they made. Essentially, what happened in the past when the United States started to pressure on North Korea to cease existing, China did not back away. China still stood by North Korea, giving supplies, aid, etc. You can extend the non-unique without going for this disadvantage. Move on to the North Korea disadvantage now. The first point that brought up is how North Korea is cracking down on the status quo. That doesn't mean that. My first response is that doesn't mean that North Korea can't increase the amount of human rights violation it commits. It can most certainly increase the amount of atrocities it commits towards its own people. The second point I bring up under this is that the North Koreans gradually increase their amount of oppression based on the amount of threat that they perceive. This fundamentally increases the amount of perception that is perceived by the North Koreans. The third point under this is that if China is perceived to be under diplomatic pressure, suddenly North Korea is going to be able to have allies. My fourth response to this is that this will also legitimize the cracking down on the government. The reason for this is essentially the wag the dog effect, which is different than the rally around the flag effect. It's where essentially a leader within a country uses international crises to justify themselves maintaining power. So in this case, they use the ICC coming into their country to justify their own maintenance of power. Additionally, they said that we could break. You could look to their argument that we would break down North Korea's strength. That is fundamentally not true because the ICC has been just at a very basic level, unable to actually make a large amount of difference, unless there's already been enough international coercion toward the issue to the point at which the issue would resolve itself anyways. You can look to issues such as that which occurred in Sudan, where the entire international community was engaged in the first place. The UN already had peacekeeping troops there, and the United States was involved, and most other countries were already involved. This is true to an extent in North Korea, but not to the extent at which other people which would need to be true for the ICC to have an impact. The reason for this is that essentially the demilitarized zone is so heavily militarized in such an ironic fashion that essentially any country attempting to do anything would result in disastrous warfare. That countries know that, and they're not willing to try to exacerbate things. And then what did you want me to say for this?
Okay, so it's a balance between external and internal threats, which means that if external threats increase, they have to suppress internal threats by becoming more militant.
Okay, so in response to the trade-off, the criticism of government is absolutely legitimate because in the response to the increase in external threats, there will absolutely be an increase in internal oppression. That is the way that governments deal with it. In terms of being able to secure their own borders, you can essentially extend our first impact that the autocratic government deals with value of life. But more importantly, is our second one, North Korean first strike. This goes conceded. Essentially, the North Korean first strike is something that would happen. Look at the new leader, Kim Jong-un. It's I was thank you. So essentially the new leader is more aggressive than the past ones. He's built up his cult of personality by taking a very hostile stance towards the United States. This means that he's a unique threat to other countries, and particularly now when his popularity is threatened by the ICC coming in, he's a leader who's irrational enough to actually go forward and commit this first strike. Move on to advantage one now. Their first response to some of our initial rebuttal is that this idea that their process of reading is what is important. We are not mutually exclusive in denying that is what they are arguing. Our entire thesis is that in doing this, we also do other things. They might be engaged in a process of reading that happens to work through methods that also actively do other things. Just because I do something for the intention of doing one thing, if I put sanctions on a country to try to get that country to do something, it would still impact that country's trade with, let's say, another country that was dependent on it for oil if the UN were to place those sanctions and no country could trade with with them. So like you can also look to the fact that like they talk about we can increase awareness. This is absolutely not true to the extent to which it actually made a difference. Like look to their second advantage. Like their awareness is like fundamentally low. Like one of the things they're advocating is like going in there to try to stop child pornography. This implies that the intent of this mission is not to like increase our mutual view of like North Korea. It is in fact intended to do the exact same thing that their first advantage was advocating against. Like the rhetoric of their advantages contradicts one another. Only one of these can be something that they can advocate for because they directly contradict. Additionally, like they said that the ICC has the research to dodge fabrication. You can look to many of the ICC's attempts to like engage tribunals. Even when the ICC was created far long after World War II to try to seek Nazi war criminals, it couldn't do it in many circumstances. The ICC's fundamental ability to like discover things about a nation relies on that nation already having enough stuff known about it. North Korea has like such little information available on it that it is highly unlikely this would exist. They also said that we exclude individuals again. Like when you're examining this argument, consider the fact that they're doing the same thing. Like this advantage contradicts their second. But more importantly, like when we're talking about like exclusionary policies, like our whole argument, like you can like they talked about how like essentially like you should extend all of our analysis on their impacts because they conceded those and just so we conceded their impacts instead. Like again, analyze the fact that like North Korea strikes first. This means that like their aggressions aren't just like fabricated. We're not just like North Korea's an evil country because they're authoritarian. North Korea literally in 2011 just started bombing South Korean islands. Like they just started doing it with like artillery. Like that is an example of how it exists. Like exposing them. Like we already like understand the root of what the effects of what is going on, and like understanding the root isn't something that they're attempting to actually solve. Additionally, like North Korea not caring does not turn the DA. Like essentially, like with North Korea, it's not that North Korea doesn't care; it's that North Korea doesn't do anything. Like North Korea won't change. North Korea sees like sentiment internationally, and they need to respond to. Instead of changing, they will respond to that. Like they're not just going to suddenly be all buddy. That doesn't happen, especially in countries with long entrenched dictators such as this. So yeah, like they also talked about the probability. Like the North Korean DA, North Korea is like militarizing now. They have nuclear weapons. Like compare the probability of these things. Like they have their leader called the United States the devil and like essentially threatened to nuke the United States. They said that they had missiles that could reach the United States. They have like repeatedly said that they would do this if it came down to the wire. Like it is quite obvious that our impacts are far more probable than theirs. The magnitude of them, however, is much more significant because it is nuclear. I will get you if I have time at the very end. Okay. Just raise your hand after I'm done with the second advantage. Go on to advantage 2. They said that essentially that they were not arguing about the UN because they talked about the ICC, which is great because neither were we. We were talking about the ICC getting credibility, both establishes UN credibility and ICC credibility, and both of these things individually prevent the United States from engaging in actions. They said that we do not need US hegemony if like the ICC can do it instead. That is absolutely not true. The ICC is not effective internationally enough to the point at which it can do this. The gap that would be created if the ICC were to get legitimacy would essentially occur in a trade-off. Like the ICC could not gain enough legitimacy fast enough to surpass the United States. The United States would lose hegemony faster than the ICC would gain it. The result of this is there would be a power vacuum for a period of time. And that means that another country could gain hegemony before the ICC is able to legitimize itself. A country like China could do that, and a country like countries like India, China, or Pakistan could compete with the United States. Great power wars in the past have become extremely bloody. Like in the modern age, they could very conceivably go nuclear. Like throughout like the United States' time as a hegemon, we've entered the most peaceful the most peaceful era in world history. They do not warrant why the United States is bad. They just say that like the ICC could also be good. But the United States is doing a fantastic job. There's absolutely no reason why the United States shouldn't do that. They don't respond to this. Don't let them bring up this argument because they should have already done it. The second point was like the U.S. Doesn't need to form conflicts, essentially they have like better checkbacks. That absolutely is not true. Like look to what happened in Yugoslavia that deterred the United States from engaging in other countries within the region simply because the response that the ICC gave to NATO. That is a direct example of how that exists. Our warrant in this case is better. Like their third point was that like we don't need other countries' hegemony. I've already responded to this. So like in response to like their whole protection of children's rights, like look to the fact that their rhetoric implies that this would not be true. Their intentions in passing the plan do not follow through with this. Additionally, however, it would make North Korea more oppressive, and that would inherently increase child trafficking. This is a turn. Like their own advantage like causes the problem it's seeking to prevent. Additionally, however, prevent U.S. intervention, and without U.S. intervention, we can't seek to solve these problems.
Overview. Advantage 1 advantage 2. Okay. Oh yeah, North Korea, the disadvantage 1 advantage 2. Did I not say that? Sorry. An overview. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
First up is the overview the defense on the DA has been refuted, which means that we have an extinction level disadvantage because they have no analysis on our impact level, but also the impacts on the affirmative are only value to life, which our argument about there's always value to life has been conceded, and the fact that the alternative cause on their advantage 1 impact means that they don't have any impacts left because both those arguments were conceded. Go to the disadvantage now. On uniqueness, they're saying that this is causing that this is going to cause China to move away from North Korea, but again, this has been the case before. Go down to internal links. They say that North Korea is cracking down on the status quo, and that the plan is going to cause a breakdown in strength. Extend my partner's argument about how the leader is going to be playing the victim role in a world where ICC has intervention, and that means that it's going to only create a rallying effect around the leaders, which is only going to increase support for the leaders and increase oppression within the country, but also extend the internal link where we tell you that North Korea leadership basically views internal external threats as a zero-sum game. When there's an external threat, they have to suppress the internal threats, which means a more oppressive stance and more human rights violations. They were unresponsive to this, which means that we get access to both our impacts, which is the first is a dissident crackdown, which means this independently kills hundreds of thousands through targeted killing, war camps, or food restrictions, but also the second impact was conceded about how North Korea is going to strike South Korea, which is going to cause a U.S. response, which will go nuclear and cause extinction. We'll go to advantage 1. The point I want on this is that extend the point my partner brought up about how their rhetoric is contradictory. They're saying that that ICC is going to be able to stop abuse of child rights within North Korea. This is an exact contradictory of their rhetoric, which means that the misperception is is inevitably low, which means they have no solvency here, and their own rhetoric shows this. But also, also go down to their go down to their impact. We tell you their only impact on this is their value to life. We tell you that there's always going to be value to life because even in concentration camp, people laugh, people cry, people tell stories. Value to life is inevitable, which means that they have no impact there. Their second impact on this was that misperception is the root cause of all violence. We told you that North Korea initiates conflict, so misperception is not the root cause of all violence, which means, and they were unresponsive to this point, which means that impact also falls, which means they have no impacts on this, as insofar as we always have value to life, and because they conceded this alternative cause argument. Go on to UN legitimacy. Except my partner's analysis why there's no reason why the UN solves better, since the U.S. intervenes far more in human rights situations than the UN, and it is imperative that the U.S. be unrestricted to intervene in human rights violations, in instances of human rights violations, which means to extend all the arguments I made, which when the ICC cracks down on the United States, it means they are less capable to intervene in human rights in instances of human rights violations, and since the U.S. is key to do this, it means that we are going to stop. It means the intervention of instances of human rights violations is going to decrease that Turns case, but also extend the analysis my partner brought up about the time trade-off. The ICC is not going to be able to gain legitimacy as fast as the United States loses heads, which means that there's going to create a power vacuum. Well, the first impact of this is that no one is going to be able to stop human rights violations, which Turns case, or in the interim, which Turns case, but also the second point under this is that it creates a power vacuum, and that's far more dangerous in a world where multiple powers are creating to become the new hegemon, and also extend my partner's argument about how this is going to increase child trafficking.
Okay, so in Venezuela, the United States stop child trafficking, the U.S.
Okay, so in Venezuela, when the UN tried to impose sanctions to stop child trafficking, Venezuela just went ahead and did it right away, which means that this ultimately turns case because the United Nations has no legitimacy to actually do anything right now, whereas the U.S. does. But also, the only impact on this advantage too is value to life, which I already told you why that's inherent, or why value to life is inevitable, which means they have no impacts, and the negative is left with 2 extinction level impact, or 1 extinction level impact.
There will be an overview on top, followed by the disadvantage and the eventual advantage too.
There are 3 reasons that Nevada CN has won the debate today. The first argument is that the probability impact framing has gotten dropped, and as a result we are going to be winning on probability on the advantages, and you are never going to be voting on the disad when they never respond to the probability framing. The second argument is the defense against the disadvantage, and including the relatively conceited link term is a reason why you never need to evaluate the disad, particularly in light of the probability framing. And the third argument is that the case is just going to straight out weigh the North Korea scenario that they read when their scenario is internal violence. That is probably a reason why when Corey reads the non-unique, you're never going to be voting there. Let's look specifically to the disad. First, you can extend Corey's argument that their argumentation that North Korea doesn't care about the ICC means that there's no link to this disad. They read their own no link to this scenario is probably a reason why you never need to evaluate it here. But their first argument is that they still can increase the amount of killing that they do right now when Corey reads the non-unique. And we say that sure, maybe they can oppress people a little more, but people are probably pretty freaking oppressed in North Korea already, which is the entire thesis of the affirmative. So this argumentation is short-circuited. Maybe they get a small linear impact, but it's nothing considerable, and there's no brick scenario here. So this is always going to be outweighed by advantage 1 and advantage 2. Yeah, Corey?
Only the case allows for a shifting focus to allow it to...
Right, only the case allows for a shift in focus that is the critical reimagining that we talk about after the PMC is probably a reason why you're going to evaluate those brink scenarios where we create a shift in the international community over their linear scenario that they read here. The next argument that they go to is that the... let's see, what argument do I want next? At the impact level, they go for this idea of a North Korea first strike, and then they read the new warrant that their new leader is more aggressive. However, you can look to Kim Jong-un actually being a pretty more docile leader in North Korea. He has eased considerably off of Kim Jong-il's ruling style and has actually not perpetuated any of the violence that they talk about. Their warrant of 2011 happened before Kim Jong-il died is probably the reason why Kim Jong-un, who has not perpetuated any attacks against South Korea, is a safer leader, and there's absolutely no brink to this scenario, but the point at which they are reading our own impact defense. The next argument that you can extend is Corey's argument that the United States nukes are always going to check against North Korean attacks because they fear the US nuclear umbrella that extends over South Korea. The point at which they don't answer this impact defense, then they're never going to be winning right now, but more importantly, you can extend all of Corey's argumentation about how the killing is happening now, and there's no unique impact scenario here. Yeah, Corey?
Mutual defense treaties.
Right, sorry, mutual defense treaties are going to be able to check back against this.
Yeah.
You have your Corey? Advantage 1. A couple of important arguments that I want to talk about on advantage 1. They say that there is, that awareness is low right now, that there's no mutual view of this. The argument that they're going for is that advantage 2 is a contradiction of advantage 1. However, this is not true, but advantage 1 says that we need to increase awareness. Advantage 2 is not saying that specifically in North Korea we're able to resolve for this. We're saying in the international community we're able to resolve for the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. So there is no competition here because I'm not saying that North Korea is uniquely causing sexual abuse against children. I'm saying the international community is. When they go really hard for this argument out of the block and it doesn't actually function because I'm not demonizing North Korea, I'm demonizing the world in action, then there's no unique link to North Korea, and I don't actually link to this. Moreover, most of their argumentation directly links to the rhetorical implications that I talk about is probably a reason why we still solve for advantage 1 and are uniquely able to capture this. But more specifically, Corey?
The MG construes the rhetorical violence as an independent reason to reject.
Right, moreover, the MG construes the rhetorical violence as an independent reason to reject the team. When this goes unresponded to, they only perpetuate this rhetorical violence. That's probably a reason why the affirmative team is winning the debate today, because we're the only team that's going to be able to access the impacts of breaking down the otherization of the North Korean individuals. Moreover, let's look, are you happy? Can I go to the impact framework? Against that? Okay, so the next argument that I want to go for is at the impact level. They say that we're never going to be able to resolve. However, my specific scenario is that North Korean citizens are not going to be targeted by international violence when the situation arises where international communities come into conflict with North Korea, and this is a unique scenario that they are not directly responding to. They say that there isn't going to be a change here, but it doesn't matter when the argument is the international intervention is going to protect North Korean citizens. They simply aren't responding to our specific scenario. Let's talk about advantage 2. The first argument they say is that the ICC credibility is going to check U.S. hedge. However, they're just not understanding our scenario. We're saying that the United Nations is going to be able to create change on its own and doesn't actually need the ICC because the United Nations is going to proceed as an independent actor. The only other thing they say is that UN diplomacy or the United Nations is going to check U.S. hedge. However, we say that we're not saying the United States is bad. We're saying UN dependency on the United States is bad. We're not actually checking their hedge. Their arguments are entirely non-unique. They say that it has been happening in the past, and we say that this is we are only going to check new scenarios through this is a unique reason why the affirmative is wrong.
You guys want to first. So first look at the disadvantage. I think that your impact to this is very linear and possibly non-unique. I mean, there's arguments to say that they're cracking down now, and I don't really understand, like, the crackdown might get worse, but that's like a couple 100,000 people who might get somehow more oppressed in the future. I don't think that's big enough impact to outweigh the case debate, especially when they're giving arguments that the advantage has a risk of resolving those impacts because of the better construction of the North Korean body or whatever, which is a bit of like a magic wand solvency nonsense, but it's coming out of PMC and fairly well extended throughout the debate. I also prioritize systematic impacts and probability framing over large-scale discussions because it means there's no political process. You're far behind on the probability framing of this debate out of PMC, which I think should be responded to in the world we're reading. Let's be honest, very nebulous and rather poorly explained nuclear war scenarios, which comes back to bite you a little bit later. Let's talk about the hedge turn, which I think is where you should be going even further in the MO. I don't think that you're going to win the dissat debate going into the MO because of the linearity of your impact. I think you should probably sit in this hedge turn a little bit more. I think that the impact of the hedge turn is incredibly nebulous. I am very specific in my debate philosophy that I require some internal link analysis as to why things will happen. You just kind of assert that, well, first of all, I think the link between the ICC telling the US they can't do human rights stuff causing the United States hegemony to collapse is like just fundamentally untrue, right? I do not understand how the ICC being like, you can't do this stuff in Yugoslavia one time means US hedge collapses so much that their competitors in China or India or Pakistan compete with the US. The next thing that you say is that causes a great power war. There is an insufficient amount of internal link analysis for me to give you full access to an argument that great power war happens because the US can't intervene in human rights. That's just like, it is nonsensical, and I don't think you do not do enough internal link analysis to win my valid on that argument, especially in a world where you've conceded the probability framing of the affirmative, right? Like, coming out of the PMC, I'm going to be skeptical of those impacts because they tell me to. Even if that wasn't in my philosophy in this particular debate, I am obligated, as per the arguments they are making, to have a huge tub of salt to evaluate those base assertions of great power wars occurring. So then I look at whether or not this, I guess it's a link turn argument, if the US decreases their hegemony or whatever, means human rights violation goes up. There is no specific impact to human rights violations increasing articulated in the LOC or the MO. You just say human rights violations, which I weigh against the ability of the affirmative to potentially solve for North Korea's construction of the other in the international sphere. I think that the affirmative is ultimately able to solve for this impact by reorienting the world towards North Korea in a more positive way, and I don't know why the ICC is not able to do that in the future. I think that there are some, like you were saying, the US is better and that there's a direct trade-off, but I do not think that you're winning the debate that the ICC is not legitimate enough without the United States. I think that your concessions of the solvency arguments on the advantage one makes it difficult, the advantage one makes it difficult for me to buy your assertion that the ICC is not able to resolve these human rights abuses in the future. So even if there is like you say there's a trade-off, but even if the US is not able to do as much with human rights, I think the ICC is probably able to resolve, and at the very least is able to resolve the impact of North Korea, which is something that I can sink my teeth into versus human rights violations increase. You continually say this turns case, but it doesn't turn the specific impacts of case because they're certainly winning that they're able to solve those impacts. So I don't understand, I don't know how to weigh human rights violations versus the specific construction of the North Korean other as being bad for displaced populations. And I think you've also conceded the argument that the United States ignores conflicts now, i.e. Crimea, which means they're not able to solve human rights in the future, which means ICC probably has the best chance of solving, and therefore for the specificity of the affirmative impact claims as well as their specificity of their link analysis. So the advantage one, debate proper. I think that I don't go to this contradiction argument. I think that you all are misunderstanding. And I don't really understand why there's contradiction. It's very clear to me from your app that it is the construction of North Korea as militaristic and bad, and grouping the citizenry with the government decisions that is what is the negative construction that creates otherization of those populations. Them saying that it is also a good idea because it solves international child abuse I do not think is an internal contradiction. That it's just saying there is also another thing that we can do. And perhaps you misunderstand that by saying North Korea causes child porn, which I think is what you say. That is not my understanding of what the argument is at all in this debate. So I don't think there's contradiction there. I think that they're able to solve for rhetorical violence against North Korean citizens that creates disposable populations. The rhetoric of the naked also does this. I'm not going to vote on this cheap shot argument. There's like no reason why them saying that is uniquely bad, right? Your advantage is in the context of international relations and the creation of that. Just saying like, oh, they said North Korea is militaristic, I'm not going to vote on that. I think that those kinds of arguments are probably bad for debate. I think that you should have a warranted analysis of why their discourse in the debate round is more important, right? You're saying discursive impacts matter, but those are, you're going to those in terms of systematic impacts matter and probability matters, which is all in the sphere of international, in IR, right, and not in the sphere of their discourse in the debate. Generally, I think you said freshman, that's a voter, you said dumb, that's ableist, that's a voter, you said North Korea's militaristic, that's a voter, are not constructive arguments in the debate round, and more or less act as ad hominems and aren't educational. I don't like them, please don't read them in the future. I think that this debate gets a lot closer than it needs to be in the PMR. Your PMR is sort of, it starts off like your overview is very good, but then you don't really do that. You don't go to your overview. You say your overview, and then you go in a bunch of other places and extend a bunch of random arguments, and the debate is saved by, basically MG offense that is conceded by the MO. So the PMR should be, the very first thing you should do is say, they've conceded our probability impact framing. Go to the top of the 1AC, extend it. Explain to me why that means I take all of their assertions with a grain of salt. Extend why that means the link turn is, irrelevant in this debate. And then, immediately after that, I think you should probably, you can switch the order of these, but you should either answer the head shit on advantage 2 next and be very specific, extending the non-uniques that they're not getting trivia now, that it comes out with a super garb in the last 10 seconds of your speech, but that's their way out, right? That's their impact. And then use the probability framing to frame out any risk of the hedge collapse and the human rights impact. All the stuff that I just said in my RFD regarding the probability question should be in the PMR. You should be writing my ballot for me on that instance. I shouldn't have to be telling you that. And then you really, really need to extend an impact. They are saying no value to life is inherent. Ultimately, you have disposed populations impact, which I think is different and operates in a slightly different systematic sphere or construction or whatever. But you really need to go to that and explain it. And I think you're doing a lot, way too much of this sort of extending little bits of whatever and not winning the framing debate. And in the world where you've written your affirmative to frame them out of the debate, this is the PMR you get to clown on them, right? You conceded the top of the 1AC. Probability is the only important thing. Oh, you also conceded the bottom of the MGN advantage 1. Probability is the only important thing. And that should be 1 minute at the top, and then should be the contextualization of every single other argument in the debate round. I think that if you do that and then just go to advantage 1 and are here's some impacts, they don't have them because they just say nuke war a bunch of times. I would vote for you much easier. I don't have to think about it nearly as much.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Any questions?
Last time we debated in front of you, we had really shitty impacts in the PMC. How did you feel about the impact construction in this PMC, and how would you do it differently, or how would you recommend we do it differently to make you happier with them in the future?
I was definitely substantially happier with these impacts than last time, and I appreciate your adapting to win my ballot. Yeah, I don't have a problem with any of these.
Okay.
They're good. They have internal links, right? They have warrants. I know why they're true. They have weighing analysis built into the PMC. That's all good shit. I think y'all need to be doing a better job, making your impacts make sense. I am not a judge who's going to vote on political impacts, and I think that you're sort of there are substantial questions for me as to you say hardliners are in power. Someone got theirs, the hardliners want theirs, which means they'll go harder than Sincock violence. There's no warrant for why they want the Sincock views. You should be making arguments about how that's oil-rich areas, how there's a nationalist, there's a history between the U.S. and China and Japan to attack each other. Those are internal link analysis that I'm not going to front you, even though I've heard this impact 100 times, right? That's got to be in the shell. You say, you just say Japan has an interest in this Sincock, which will have to respond. The rapid Japanese pull-off is okay. You say those pull-off in 6 months. that's just a warrantless assertion. I don't know why it was 6 months. The warrants for that is they have a particularly technologically advanced economy and a lot of civilian nuclear power, so they'll be able to do it. That is internal link analysis that needs to happen. You say destabilization encourages first strike. You are, I think, the miscalculation analysis is okay, but I think you're missing discussions of like conventional military parity requiring nuclear war to happen, and like, yeah, I don't really know why North Korea randomly first strikes just to catch them off guard. Like, the uniqueness question of this impact is kind of confusing me from the get-go. I think there's crackdown now. I think North Korea's pissed off now. I'm not quite sure why the plan is like the, you know, the brink or whatever. But and I don't know why the U.S. nukes North Korea, because they can't get to Seoul so fast. Just as like a truthy thing, like there are tunnels, but like those tunnels are really, really old. They're like 1950s Cold War tunnels, and South Korea definitely know, if you know they're there, better believe that South Korea knows they're there, and they're like not just like chilling with their backs to the tunnel being like, let's wait until North Korea comes marching through, right? They guard the shit out of those. The DMZ on the South Korea side is like heavily, heavily militarily protected. You go on tours with that, and you get to like sit in your little like car and like not touch anything and not say words because it's like, you know, militaristic state in that area. But yeah, any other questions?
Your RFD was very, very good, I thought. None for me.
Good.
I have a question about the internal argument on the North Korea side, where we're talking about the zero-sum balance between like internal and external threats. Did that like make sense to you, or was that?
It made sense, but I'm not sure why that's true.
Okay.
Like, I understand the analysis, right? That like, but I think your explanation of like I don't. This argument needs to be like, North Korea somehow gains credibility by cracking down internally, which is what they need to justify themselves in a world of external threats. Okay. I don't know why that's the case, right? Like there's some words somewhere in the MO about like dissidents, and like they want to make sure dissidents don't increase, but I think the internal link analysis of why dissidents increases when there are external threats doesn't make sense to me. And in a world where North Korea like completely controls all of the state media, like, I don't know, A, why it's not the status quo that every citizen thinks that everyone is super evil and out to get North Korea. My understanding of the media there is like, North Korea is the best place, everyone else is monsters. So I don't know why them, you know, coming in or whatever would make them look like more of monsters, and that causes dissidence. Like, it would seem to go the other way to me intuitively. But there needs to be an explanation of like, why the international community coming in makes civilians dissent more, which causes more crackdown. And I think you're just kind of saying the crackdown happens because, you know, like they have to securitize, right? The external internal trade-off. But I think that the warrant for that is like the framing is good, the warrant is missing.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool.
Yep.
Thanks. Thank you.